Among all modern methods of execution, one stands out not for its speed or humanity, but for its ability to prolong suffering to the ultimate limit of human endurance. That's a suffocation chamber. If the electric chair was brutality disguised by blinding light and deafening noise, then the gas chamber was a death that was gentle on the surface, but a true hell within. The story of this method began with a seemingly reasonable decision in 1921, when the state of Nevada decided they needed a change. In the early 20th century, hanging remained the standard method of execution across the United States. But after witnessing too many executions turn into bloody tragedies, severed heads, necks that didn't break causing prisoners to writhe in agony for minutes, distorted faces and protruding tongues, Nevada authorities understood they needed a different solution. It's not because they truly care about the pain of the condemned. The truth is simpler and more brutal. They are tired of causing psychological trauma to witnesses. Witnesses left the execution chamber with panicked eyes, some unable to sleep for weeks. Bang needs a method that looks more humane, regardless of whether it actually is. After many meetings, officials came up with the idea of poisonous gas. They need something readily available, inexpensive, and relatively easy to use. Their research led to hydrogen cyanide, a gas that France and the US used as a chemical weapon in World War I with significant effectiveness. If it can kill hundreds of soldiers in the trenches, it can certainly kill one person in a controlled environment. Logic is simple and terrible. In 1924, the state of Nevada had its first white mouse for their experiments. Ji John, a member of the Chinese criminal gang Hip Sing Tong, was sentenced to death for murdering an older member of the organization. His sentencing coincided with the state's implementation of a new method. But there's a big problem. They don't have a decompression chamber yet. They don't have a protocol yet. They don't even know exactly how to do this. Then, someone in the meeting came up with a dangerous idea. Why not pump gas directly into his cell while he's sleeping? Gee, John won't know anything. He will die in his sleep. In the minds of decision-makers, this is mercy. If the condemned man doesn't see death coming, is it more humane? The idea was approved. One night, while Ji John was in a deep sleep, prison staff used a tube to pump a large amount of hydrogen cyanide into his cell. But immediately, they encountered their first problem. This was not an airtight glass cell. This is a traditional cell with iron bars. The gas is pumped in, and then it escapes. It spread throughout the prison corridors, threatening the lives of staff and other inmates. Disaster was averted by a hair's breadth. The plan failed completely. They went back to the drawing board. This time, they understood that they needed a truly airtight space, a booth. They began construction right inside the prison's slaughterhouse. A terrifying symbolic coincidence. The next step is to have enough gas. There's only one company in the Western Hemisphere capable of supplying the necessary amount of hydrogen cyanide, but they refuse to ship it because it is too dangerous. Solution? A group of prison employees drove to Los Angeles, loaded bottles of poisonous gas into the trunk of their car, and drove hundreds of miles back to Nevada. Imagine a car accident on the road. By February 8, 1924, everything was ready. Ji John was led into an 11-foot-long enclosed chamber and strapped to a wooden chair. A small window allows witnesses to look in. At 9:40 a.m., the pump sprayed approximately 4 pounds of hydrocyanic acid, a solution of hydrogen cyanide and water, into the chamber. But even during this official test, there were still glitches. Outside, it's cold and damp. Their electric heater is broken. The temperature in the chamber is only 52 degrees Fahrenheit, while the ideal temperature should be around 75 degrees. This caused some of the solution to pool on the floor instead of evaporating upwards where Ji John could inhale it. But fortunately, or unfortunately, they used too much gas. It's extra. Ji John collapsed in his chair and appeared to lose consciousness within seconds. His head continued to nod gently up and down for a few minutes afterward, but overall, it got the job done. Nevada officials breathed a sigh of relief. They think they've found a solution. They think they've found a humane way to kill people. In the following years, Other states across the United States began to adopt the asphyxiation chamber method. The chambers became more sophisticated, and the protocols were refined. Hydrogen cyanide became the standard choice. But no one really understood what was about to happen. No one knew that this humane method would result in the most horrific deaths in the history of modern executions. And no one, until it was too late, realized that they had created a perfect torture machine disguised under the guise of science and progress. The true story of the gas chamber didn't begin with G. John. It began with a man named Jimmy Lee Gray and the most terrifying 8 minutes any witness has ever endured. Before discussing the death of Jimmy Lee Gray, before describing the 8 terrifying minutes he endured in the gas chamber, it's necessary to understand who this person was, not to elicit sympathy because there will be none, but to understand that even with the worst of people, the way we choose to end their lives still reflects ourselves, not them. Jimmy Lee Gray began his criminal career at the age of 18. That year, one evening in Arizona, he and his 16-year-old girlfriend, Elda Prince, were walking home after a date. They argued. About what, no one knows for sure. Perhaps trivial things that teenage couples often argue about. But Jimmy didn't stop at words. He strangled Elda with his hands until she stopped moving, stopped breathing, stopped existing. Then, he dragged the little girl's body near the Colorado River and hid it, as if she had never existed. When Elda didn't come home, her mother reported her missing. The police began searching. And Jimmy? He joined the search team. He went with the neighbors, with Elda's family, pretending to be worried, pretending to hope they would find the little girl alive. But the police are not easily fooled. They saw something in the way he behaved, some inconsistency in his story. They took him into the interrogation room. Jimmy can't keep a secret for long. He confessed everything. The court convicted him. But here's the confusing part. Jimmy Lee Gray only served 6 years in prison. 6 years for a human life. Then he was released on condition. He walked out of prison, a free man carrying something dark and irreparable within him. Just 2 years after being released, a 3-year-old girl went missing from the apartment complex where Jimmy was living in Mississippi. Witnesses said they saw the child with a man who matched Jimmy's description. This time, the police didn't need much time. They know who they're looking for. They brought Jimmy to the station, and once again, under the pressure of interrogation, he broke down. He told them about how he had kidnapped the child, how he had raped her, and how he had thrown her body into the river like a discarded object. No regrets, no tears. It's just a cold and brutal truth. This time, the justice system has no intention of giving him a second chance. Jimmy Lee Gray was sentenced to death. The execution date was set for September 2nd, 1983. His final night unfolded according to a strange ritual. He was allowed to order the final dish, a peculiar American tradition, as if a good meal could compensate for impending death. Jimmy chose Mexican food, fresh strawberries, and a glass of cold milk. He ate alone in his cell, with food brought in on a plastic tray. 5 priests were allowed to visit him in his final hours, bringing with them the hope of salvation, of confession, of repentance. They even brought their own pizza, turning the cell into a bizarre little party. Men of God eating pizza while sitting next to a child killer counting down the last minutes of his life. As the witnesses were being led to their seats, chairs arranged behind a small window overlooking the execution chamber, Jimmy was called out of his cell. He walked through the long hallway, his chained legs slowing his every step. In front of him was a suffocating steam room. It's not like the crude chamber built in the prison slaughterhouse in 1924. This version is more modern, more terrifying. A giant steel structure resembling a massive safe, bulky and suffocating. Just looking at it is enough to make people feel afraid. The door is opened. Jimmy walked in. In the center of the room was a chair, the death chair as everyone called it. He was asked to sit down. The prison staff began to tie him up. Belt around the waist, chest strap, arm restraint strap. The belt tightens around my legs. But there was one detail that was overlooked, a detail that would later become terrifyingly important. The head restraint, which had been used in similar executions previously, was not attached. It could be negligence. It's possible someone thought it wasn't necessary. Whatever the reason, Jimmy's head and neck could still move freely. The warden read the death sentence. His voice was steady, emotionless, as if he were reading a weather report. Jimmy was asked if he had any last words. He remained silent, head bowed, eyes tightly closed. There's no apology. There is no prayer. There was only silence. Exactly at 12:12 a.m., the cabin door was closed with a resounding metallic clang. Through the small window, 15 witnesses looked in. They saw Jimmy sitting there, tightly bound to the chair. They saw a metal drum placed right under the seat, filled with sulfuric acid. And they saw the executioner, standing outside the chamber, placing his hand on a lever. The lever needs to be pulled down. Cyanide crystals fell into the acid. The chemical reaction starts immediately. White smoke began to rise from under the seats, and 8 minutes in hell began. Hydrogen cyanide is colorless, but as it rose from the chemical reaction beneath Jimmy's chair, it carried with it a thin cloud of white smoke like an early morning mist. It rose quickly, covering his legs, body, and finally his face. For the first few seconds, Jimmy remained silent, as if trying to stay calm in the face of the inevitable. But the human body isn't designed to stop breathing. Survival instinct is stronger than will. Witnesses sitting behind the window saw Jimmy's body begin to convulse. Then they saw him inhale, a deep, involuntary, desperate breath. That was the first breath of death. Toxic gas flooded his mouth, passed through his throat, down his trachea, and spread throughout his lungs. In medicine, the sensation of hydrogen cyanide is described as inhaling boiling liquid acid. The mucous membranes in the nose and throat are immediately burned. The sweet, bitter almond smell assaulted the nostrils, a scent that many victims of this poison gas described as the last thing they remembered before pain consumed all their senses. Jimmy's tongue must be feeling a sharp metallic taste, like licking a rusty razor. His face began to change color. From his initial pale complexion, his skin turned pink, then red, and finally a deep crimson, like the color of a ripe tomato. The jugular vein in his neck swelled, beating so strongly and clearly that witnesses could count his heart rate from across the glass. His mouth opened in a silent, gaping expression, eyes wide open. Jimmy started to struggle. His body jerked violently against the restraining straps. The arm tried to pull away from the chair, legs kicking strongly in the air, but the straps held tight. Only the head and neck, parts that are not fixed, can move. Initially, he seemed to be trying to hold his breath, fighting against the most natural human instinct. But no one can win that battle. Carbon dioxide accumulates in the blood, activating chemoreceptors in the brain, forcing the diaphragm to contract. The body is trying to save itself, unaware that each breath is an invitation to death. Jimmy inhaled for the second time, and then the third time. By the 10th time, he inhaled rapidly and desperately, like a drowning person finally giving up and letting the water fill their lungs. But each breath brought not salvation, but only more pain. Hydrogen cyanide is not simply an asphyxiant. It's a systemic toxin, a killer that attacks from all directions simultaneously. At the cellular level, the toxic gas is destroying the body's ability to use oxygen. It attaches to enzymes in the mitochondria, the cell's energy-producing components, and turns them off. Every cell in Jimmy's body is starving, even though his blood is still full of oxygen. That's why his skin turned bright red. The blood didn't release oxygen into the tissues, retaining its oxidized red color. The internal organs are failing. My heart is racing. The brain is lacking energy but still has enough to feel pain. At the same time, the gas is corroding every surface it touches. Jimmy's eyes were constantly tearing up, but these weren't tears of emotion. They were a reaction from his tear glands trying to flush out the toxins. Because his skin, especially moist areas like his lips and nostrils, is suffering from chemical burns. Inside, the lining of the esophagus, stomach, and intestines is being dissolved. The lung lining is peeling. If you could look inside his body, it would look like someone had poured acid down his throat and lit a fire from within. After 11 breaths, the moaning began. They don't sound like the moans of someone in pain. They are deeper, rougher, no longer entirely human. They are the sounds a creature mortally wounded would make, sounds from the depths of its throat, from somewhere deep and primal. The moans rose to a howl. The witnesses' jaws dropped. Some turned away, some closed their eyes, but they still heard. Then Jimmy did something no one expected. He turned his head to look at a vertical steel column near the chair, a structural component of the chamber. For a fleeting moment, it seemed as though there was a final glimmer of reason in his eyes. Then he started banging his head against the metal. The first blow echoed in the closed chamber, then the second blow, stronger, then the third, fourth, and fifth shots. Each blow was stronger than the last, as if he were trying to extinguish his own consciousness, trying to escape the pain by causing brain trauma. Blood started to flow. The face, already bruised and red, was now disfigured by wounds, swollen, mottled with purple bruises and the red of fresh blood. The witnesses couldn't believe what they were seeing. This is not death. This is torture. The man in front of them was drinking poison, being burned from the inside out, banging his head against metal, and still wasn't dead. They began to understand that human life is not as fragile as they thought. It's incredibly durable. In the 8th minute, prison staff hastily ushered all witnesses out of the room. Jimmy Lee Gray is not dead yet. He hasn't even lost consciousness yet. And by law, they are not allowed to let the public see the rest. After the witnesses were removed from the observation room, no one knew exactly when Jimmy Lee Gray died. The process requires that the fumigation chamber be kept sealed for at least 30 minutes after the gas is released, enough time for the toxin to complete its work and begin to dissipate. During that time, no one could enter, regardless of what was happening inside. Once the lever is pulled, there's no turning back. That's the most cruel feature of the gas chamber. No emergency stop button, no way to intervene, no last-minute mercy. After the waiting period ended, the fully protected staff entered the chamber. They had to shake the hair and clothes of the corpses to release any air pockets trapped in the fabric. Even when dead, the body is still dangerous. They removed the straps and moved the body to the waiting ambulance. Surely all of this happened to Jimmy Lee Gray, but no one outside the room knew how much longer he lived after those 8 terrifying minutes. No one knows whether he was unconscious afterward or how long he remained conscious and in pain. The prison authorities are trying to control the narrative. They issued a statement to the press that Jimmy Lee Gray had died of a heart attack in the 3rd minute, a quick and relatively painless death. But the witnesses know the truth. They were there. They saw it. There are no signs of a heart attack. At the 8th minute, he was still groaning, still breathing, still suffering. Some witnesses spoke to the press. The story is really spreading. Bang, Mississippi hopes the scandal will quietly disappear. It didn't disappear. But the gas chamber didn't stop after that failure. Some states continued to use it for many years afterward. Arizona was particularly stubborn, continuing to execute prisoners using hydrogen cyanide until 1999, more than a decade after most other states had abandoned the method. And now, in the context of a crisis in the supply of lethal injection drugs, Arizona is considering bringing it back. History is threatening to repeat itself. But why is this method so terrible? The science behind it explains everything. Hydrogen cyanide doesn't just kill by blocking oxygen, it attacks the cell's mechanism for using oxygen. When you inhale it, the gas enters your bloodstream and travels to every cell in your body. There, it attaches to an enzyme called cytochrome C oxidase, an essential component of the mitochondrial electron transport chain. Without this enzyme, cells cannot produce ATP, the energy currency of life. The body is essentially starving for energy, even though the blood is still full of oxygen. This is why cyanide gas victims have unusually bright red skin. The oxygen isn't being used and remains in the blood. At the same time, the gas is causing chemical burns. The sensitive soft tissues in the lungs are the easiest victims. With each breath, the delicate alveolar membranes are burned. Imagine inhaling red-hot embers into your lung. It feels similar to that. And unlike external burns, where nerves can be destroyed and pain reduced, internal burns retain full pain sensation until the brain completely shuts down. Many people think they can simply hold their breath until they pass out, but that's almost impossible. The human respiratory system has a biological limit. When you hold your breath, The carbon dioxide level in your blood increases while oxygen decreases. Chemoreceptors in the carotid arteries and brain continuously monitor these levels. When carbon dioxide exceeds a certain threshold, usually around 87 seconds for a normal person, the brain triggers an involuntary breathing rhythm. This is not a conscious decision. You can't stop it with willpower. He's trying to save you, not knowing that in this case, he's killing you. Even people with exceptional abilities like free divers, who are trained to hold their breath for minutes, only extend their endurance. And while they held their breath, the gas was still working. It penetrates the skin, especially in moist areas like the eyes and mouth. It penetrates through the mucous membrane. There's no way out of the suffocating steam chamber. It's a perfect trap. Compared to other methods of execution, the gas chamber stands out for its cruelty. With the electric chair, there's a chance the first shock will cause immediate unconsciousness. With a lethal injection, the first drug can put the prisoner into a deep state of unconsciousness. With execution by firing squad, a bullet to the heart can cause death within seconds. But with a decompression chamber, there's no quick escape. The average time to death is 6 to 12 minutes, and every second of it was hell. Some states are starting to look for alternatives. In 2015, Oklahoma passed a law allowing the use of nitrogen hypoxia, a method in which inmates are forced to inhale only pure nitrogen until their organs are deprived of oxygen and shut down. Unlike hydrogen cyanide, nitrogen does not cause pain. It's not just a silent lack of oxygen. People lose coordination, balance, and consciousness, and then die without a burning sensation, extreme pain, bulging eyes, or purple skin. Several other states followed Oklahoma's lead, but to date, no state has actually used this method to execute anyone. The protocols are still incomplete. So what is the legacy of the gas chamber? It's a lesson in how deceptive appearances can be. From the outside, it looks scientific, clean, modern, a step up from the barbarity of the gallows or electric chair. But inside that closed chamber, the reality is completely the opposite. It's one of the most painful ways humans have ever devised to die, disguised under the guise of scientific progress. The story of Jimmy Lee Gray and countless others who died in the gas chamber raises uncomfortable questions about the nature of justice. No matter how terrible their crimes, the way we choose to end their lives still reflects our society, our values, the limits of our compassion, and what we are willing to do in the name of the law.